So now we have a bunch of migrations where each migration describes a set of changes. So each migration is like a commit in a version control system like Git, right? Now we're going to run these migrations to generate our database schema. So here in the terminal, we run Python manage.py migrate. All right, so Django went through all the installed apps and executed all the pending migrations. So as you can see, we have a migration that comes from the content types app. We have another migration that comes from the auth app. We have a bunch of migrations from the admin app and so on. Now, where is our database? Well, if you look at the Explorer panel over here, you can see a file called db.sqlite3. So this is our SQLite database, which is a very lightweight database you should only use for development or very small websites. Now, here in VS Code, I have an extension called SQLite, which we can use for opening a SQLite database. So if you don't have this extension, go ahead and install it. There are also other tools, like there is a tool called DB Browser for SQLite, which you can get from sqlitebrowser.org. It's a free but crappy application, but it gets the job done. We're going to use it only in this lesson because from the next lesson, we're going to switch to MySQL, okay? So install this extension and then bring up the command palette. So on the top, you can go to View menu and open the command palette. The shortcut is Shift, Command, and P on Mac or Shift Control P on Windows. So we open this up, search for SQLite, open database. You can see our database in the list, so let's select it. Good. Now let's open the Explorer panel and collapse our project. We have a new node here called SQLite Explorer. Now, here you can see our database as well as all the tables we have in this database. So we have a bunch of tables that belong to the auth app. These tables are used for authenticating and authorizing users. We'll talk about them later in the course. Then we have 3 tables that are used by Django to do its job. Again, we'll look at this soon. We have 1 table that belongs to our Likes app. We have a bunch of tables that belong to the Store app. And as you can see, all these tables are named using singular names. So we have address, cart, cart item, collection, and so on. If you don't like singular names, you can always change them. I'll show you how to do that later in this section. We also have a couple of tables that belong to the Tags app, okay? Now, let's open the migrations table. So we right click on it and select Show Table. This table keeps track of the migrations that have been applied to this database. So the first migration comes from the Content Types app. Here's the name of the migration, and here you can see the date and time this migration was applied. So currently we have 22 migrations applied to this database. And that means if we go back to the terminal and run the migrate command one more time, nothing is going to happen because all the migrations we have in this project have been executed. So using this table, Django can tell which migrations have been applied and which migrations haven't. So this is how we can run our migrations. Now we have another command called SQL migrate. And using this command, we can see the actual SQL code that is sent to our database at runtime. For example, if you want to see the SQL code for the 3rd migration in the Store app, here we type the name of our app and the sequence number of our migration file. So this is the actual SQL statement that Django will send to our database. And this will be dependent on the database backend we use. So currently we're using SQLite. Later, when we switch to MySQL or a different backend, the SQL code that will be generated will be different, okay? Now, one last thing before we finish this lesson. Is it SQL or SQL? Well, this language was originally called SQL, which is short for Structured English Query Language. But SQL was a trademark of an aircraft company, so IBM didn't want to get into legal issues. That's why it changed the language to SQL. Now, some people prefer to call it SQL, other people call it SQL. So don't hate me for calling it SQL, that's just my preference. Now, what about MySQL? Isn't that MySQL? Well, according to MySQL team, they prefer their tool to be called MySQL, but they don't mind it if you call it MySQL. So I personally call this tool MySQL, but I prefer to refer to the language as SQL. And now a little exercise for you. Add the zip field to the address class, create a migration, run it, and then inspect the migrations table so you see the whole workflow in action.